My life took a weird turn the day Mrs. Baker walked into our store, right when I was stacking some plates. I grew up here, you know? Since I was a kid, I've been helping my parents at our family tableware shop, learning the ropes of running a small business. It was cozy, filled with the clink of porcelain and the warm smiles of regulars. But that day, something was different. "Emma," my dad called out from behind the counter, waving me over. Mrs. Baker, the owner of the bakery next door, was with him, a stern look on her face that didn't match her usual cheery public persona. I wiped my hands on my apron and approached them. "What's up, Dad?" "Mrs. Baker here has a proposal," Dad said, shooting a glance that seemed a mix of confusion and curiosity. She didn't waste any time. "Emma, I've been talking to your father about a potential partnership between our two businesses." I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms. "A partnership? Like what, turning the bakery and the shop into some sort of megastore?" "Exactly," she nodded sharply. "And there's more. I think it would be a good idea if you and my son, Michael, got to know each other better." I choked on my own breath. "Wait, what? Michael? Why?" "It's simple," she snapped, her voice firm, almost commanding. "Michael and you getting together would make this business merger smooth." "It makes sense, Emma. Think about the potential." I looked over at Dad, who seemed just as stunned but intrigued. "You're talking about a marriage merger? Like in the movies?" "Yeah," Mrs. Baker continued. "It's all for the business, sweetheart. You two could be a power couple, the face of a new joint venture. It's practical." Dad nudged me gently. "Emma, just meet him. No harm in that, right?" I sighed, looking from my dad's hopeful face to Mrs. Baker's stern one. "Fine. I'll meet him. But I'm not promising anything more than that." "Good," Mrs. Baker smiled, her expression softening just a bit. "He's coming by tomorrow. You'll see, it might work out." The next day, true to her word, Michael came into the shop. He was taller than I expected, with a kind smile and a way of moving that was confident but not overbearing. We talked over coffee, surrounded by the clinks of our store, and I had to admit, he was nothing like his mother, polite, funny, and surprisingly down to earth. "So, your mom tells me we're supposed to save the family businesses by getting hitched?" I joked, trying to keep the mood light. He laughed, a genuine, hearty sound. "Yeah, she has a way of putting things, doesn't she? Look, I know this is weird, but I think we could make a good team, in business at least." I found myself nodding, more taken with him than I wanted to admit. "Maybe. If the business side of things works out." As he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that this crazy idea might just work, or at the very least, it wouldn't be boring. Marrying Michael had felt like stepping into a whirlwind. Before I knew it, our businesses were smashed together into one big store. It sounded good on paper, but living it was another story. Mrs. Baker had her fingers in every pie, literally and figuratively. It wasn't long before she started calling the shots at the store, her store now, I guess. One Monday morning, I was setting up the display when Mrs. Baker stomped in, her heels clicking loudly against the tile floor. "Emma, those plates go in the back. The front is for the pastries now," she barked, not even a good morning. I bit back my irritation. "Sure, Mrs. Baker. I'll move them. And call me Janice, we're family now," she said, but it sounded less like a warm invitation and more like a command. I shuffled the plates to the back, muttering under my breath. The change was more than just physical space, it was in everything. I wasn't just selling tableware now. I was up to my elbows in flour and sugar, helping with the pastries when the baker called in sick, which seemed to happen more than it should. One afternoon, while I was wiping down tables, Michael came over, a rare sight since he mostly handled the bakery's supply side. "How's it going, Em?" he asked, leaning on a clean table. I shrugged, keeping it cool. "Just peachy. I never imagined I'd know so much about pastries." He chuckled, scratching his neck. "Yeah, Mom can be a bit much. But she knows the business, you know? I nodded, though I didn't completely agree. Sure, she knows her stuff. But I feel more like I'm just another one of her employees, not a partner. Michael frowned slightly. It's just the way she does things, Em. Give it time, she'll ease up. I doubted that, but changed the subject. We talked a bit more about some minor tweaks to the menu before he was called away. Things didn't ease up. If anything, they got tighter. I found myself staying later, cleaning up after closing, something I never had to worry about before. One evening, I was finishing up, and Mrs. Baker was counting the day's earnings, her lips a thin line. You missed a spot on the counter, Emma. And make sure those trays are spotless, she ordered without looking up from her papers. I cleaned the spot she mentioned, my hands moving automatically. Janice, I was thinking, maybe we could try some new designs for the tableware, to match the pastries? She barely glanced at me. No need. The current ones sell fine. Focus on what's selling, Emma. That's the bottom line. Her words stung a bit. I was used to having ideas, being part of decisions. Now, it felt like I was just here to follow orders. I missed the old days, the old store, my old life. Moving in with my husband's parents wasn't my idea of a perfect setup, but Janice insisted it made sense. Why waste money on rent when you can live here and help out more at the store? She had said. Her house was just a short walk from our joint business, making it all too easy for me to spend most of my waking hours there. At first, things seemed okay. The bakery and store were booming, and revenue was up. I was busy, sure, but it felt like we were all pulling together for a common cause. That was until I realized the price I was paying. I had to drop out of college. You won't need a degree to sell plates and pastries, Janice told me, dismissing my dreams as if they were crumbs on the table. One chilly morning, as I was arranging a new batch of ceramic teapots that had just arrived, Janice marched in, her eyes scanning the store like a general assessing their troops. Emma, why are these teapots here? I told you, the new pastry display goes in this section, she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the morning calm. I sighed, pushing down the irritation bubbling inside me. Sorry, Janice. I thought they'd catch more eyes here. I'll move them. She watched me, her arms crossed. Look, Emma, I appreciate your ideas, but we need to focus on what sells. Pastries are selling, not these fancy teapots. I moved the teapots to the back, feeling a sting of frustration. It was becoming clear that my role here was more about following orders than bringing any of my own ideas to the table. Later that day, Dad came by the store. It was becoming a rare occurrence. He looked around quietly, a somber look on his face. We found a quiet corner, and I asked him straight up, Dad, why don't you come by much anymore? He sighed, looking tired. Emma, things have changed. Janice has, well, she's taken over completely. I'm just in the way here. I frowned, confused and a bit angry. But it's our store too. Can't you talk to her? Dad shook his head. It's not that simple. The contract we signed. I didn't look at it close enough. It's all tilted in her favor. I'm basically out of the loop. I clenched my fists, feeling betrayed. That's not fair, Dad. We should do something about it. He patted my shoulder, trying to smile. It's business, Emma. I guess I just got outplayed. Just try to get along, okay? I nodded, though resentment simmered inside me. After Dad left, I went back to work, my thoughts chaotic with anger and helplessness. A few days later, Janice caught me rearranging some of the displays to make room for new stock. Emma, what are you doing? I didn't approve this change, she snapped, her eyes narrowing. I stood my ground this time. Janice, we need to make room for new stock. These items aren't selling. We can't just push pastries, people come here for variety. She stepped closer, her voice low and harsh. Listen here, I know what I'm doing. This isn't some little game, Emma. It's a business. My business now. You do well to remember that. Her words hit hard, and I was left speechless as she walked away, leaving me to stew in my frustration. When the pandemic hit, it threw everyone into chaos, our store included. Sales nosedived as lockdowns kept our regulars tucked away at home. I remember standing in the middle of the eerily quiet store, feeling the weight of impending doom. It was clear we had to pivot, and fast, or we'd be another casualty of the crisis. One morning, I approached Janice, who was busy flipping through inventory lists that looked more depressing by the day. "Janice, we should take the store online," I suggested, trying to sound as confident as possible. "We can set up a delivery system. It might help us keep going until all this blows over." She looked up, skeptical. "Online, huh? And who's going to set that up? You?" "Yes, me. I've been reading about it. It's not that hard, and I think it's worth a shot," I responded, feeling my resolve harden. With a heavy sigh, Janice finally conceded. "Fine. Do what you can. But this better work, Emma." I threw myself into the project, learning everything from website design to logistics. Surprisingly, or maybe not, the online shift was a hit. Orders started rolling in, and it wasn't long before we were busier than we had been in months. I managed everything, from updating the website daily to coordinating with couriers, and it felt good to be proactive, to steer the ship through stormy waters. As the pandemic waned and life slowly edged back to normal, I had a new idea. "Janice, why don't we keep focusing on online sales and individual orders? It could be a new direction for us," I proposed one evening as we were tallying up the day's sales, which had shown a promising upturn thanks to the online orders. Janice didn't even look up from the books. "No, Emma. We're going back to how things were. That's enough of this online nonsense." It was a temporary fix, not a new business model. Michael was there too, nodding along to his mother's words. "Mom's right, Em. People will want to come back in person. Let's not fix what isn't broken." I bit my tongue, holding back a retort. It was frustrating. We had a golden opportunity to evolve, but they were too set in their ways to see it. A few weeks later, as we officially halted the online operations and focused on in-store traffic, I overheard Janice talking to a group of her friends in the store, laughing and boasting. Yes, it was quite a challenge, but I managed to keep the business afloat during the pandemic. We had to adapt, of course. I paused behind a shelf, my hands clenched into fists. The nerve of her, taking credit for my sleepless nights, my ideas, my hard work. It stung, but I swallowed my anger. Arguing wouldn't change her attitude, and it wasn't worth the drama. It was a gloomy Tuesday, rain pelting down so hard it drummed against the store windows like 1,000 tiny drums. Most folks were smart enough to stay indoors, but the shop was open, just in case. I was tidying up some displays near the entrance, lost in thought, when the bell over the door jingled sharply. A small girl, no older than 8, stood dripping in the doorway. Her coat was soaked through, hair plastered to her head, eyes wide and scared. I dropped the cloth I was holding and rushed over. "Hey there, sweetie, come on in. You're soaking wet," I said, guiding her gently inside. She shivered, clutching a small backpack to her chest. I got lost. I can't find my mom." "Don't worry, we'll find her, okay? Let's get you warmed up first," I reassured her, fetching a towel from the back to dry her off. As I was rubbing her hair dry, Janice stormed over, frowning deeply. "What's this, Emma? Why is this child here? She's dripping all over the floor." I frowned back, protective over the little girl. "She's lost, Janice. She needs help." Janice scoffed, waving dismissively at the girl. "She's probably just a beggar. We don't need this kind of trouble. Get her out of here before she scares away any customers." I stood up, feeling my temper rise. "She's a child, Janice. It's pouring outside. We can't just throw her out. Do I have to remind you that this is a business, not a charity?" Janice snapped, glaring at both of us. Before I could argue further, Michael walked in, catching the tail end of our conversation. What's going on here?" His mom explained with an impatient gesture towards the girl. "Emma wants to turn the store into a homeless shelter. I say she goes out the same way she came in." Michael looked at the girl, then at me, and sighed. "Emma, Mom's right. We can't start taking in strays. It's bad for business." As the argument heated up, I made a decision. I couldn't leave her out there alone. Ignoring Janice's protests, I picked up the phone and dialed the local police station. The police arrived quickly, given the weather and the circumstance. One of the officers wrapped the girl in a warm blanket I had brought from the back. They thanked me for keeping her safe and took down some information. Before she left, the girl hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Watching her leave with the officers, hopefully to be reunited with her family soon, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. Janice walked over, her expression hard. "I'll be docking your pay for the day, Emma. And you can clean up this mess yourself," she said coldly. I was too tired to argue. The rest of the day passed in a blur of scrubbing and silent treatment from Janice and Michael. Their attitude stung, but holding that scared, grateful girl in my arms, I knew I'd done the right thing, no matter what they thought. It was a regular Thursday morning at the store, just a week after the rainy day incident with the lost little girl. I was rearranging some of the newer pastries when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up, expecting another customer, but instead, I saw a well-dressed man I'd never seen before. He walked straight to me, his expression serious yet friendly. "Good morning," he greeted. "Are you Emma?" "That's me," I replied, a bit puzzled. "Can I help you with something?" "Yes, actually. I'm Thomas. I don't know if you remember, but you helped my daughter last week when she was lost. She hasn't stopped talking about how kind you were." I blinked in surprise, remembering the little girl's tight hug. "Oh, yes, of course. I'm just glad she's safe now. How is she?" "She's great, thanks to you," he smiled. "I actually came here to thank you personally and also to offer my help, if you ever need it." I was taken aback. "That's very kind of you, but I don't know what you could help with." Thomas handed me his card. "I'm a lawyer. I specialize in business and contract law. After what my daughter told me about how you treated her, I thought maybe if you ever need legal advice or anything, I could be of service." I stared at the card, then at Thomas. A lawyer could be useful, especially now. "Actually, there might be something. But it's a bit complicated." Thomas nodded, gesturing toward a quieter corner of the shop. "I'm all ears." We sat down at one of the tables, and I briefly explained the situation with Janice and the store, how things had changed after the merger, my reduced role, and my father's situation. Thomas listened intently, occasionally nodding. "It sounds like you've been put in a tough spot. If you can get me the merger documents, I can take a look, see if there's anything that can be done legally to renegotiate your position or at least get you some more control." I fetched the documents from my file at home and brought them to Thomas the next day. He promised to look over them and get back to me as soon as possible. True to his word, a few days later, he called me into his office to discuss his findings. "Emma, I've gone through everything," Thomas began as soon as I sat down in his office. "There are a few areas where the agreement seems heavily biased against your father. It looks like there were some oversight and possibly misleading information when he signed." My heart pounded with a mix of anger and relief. "So, what can we do?" Thomas leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "We can challenge the agreement based on these discrepancies. It's not a guaranteed win, but it's a start. You have a right to fight this, Emma." I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision. "Let's do it. It's time I took a stand." After meeting with Thomas, my mind was a whirlwind of doubt and guilt. Was I doing the right thing by challenging my husband and his family? The thought of ruining their lives weighed heavily on me as I headed home. But as soon as I stepped through the door, the scene that greeted me swept all my doubts away. The house was bustling with noise and guests. It was our wedding anniversary, an event I had completely forgotten about in the midst of all the chaos. As I hesitated at the entrance, trying to process the celebration, Jana spotted me. Her face flushed from drink, she stormed over, her voice loud and slurring. "There you are! Wandering the streets when you should be here serving your guests," she shouted. I tried to apologize. "Janice, I'm sorry, But before I could finish, she hurled an empty plate in my direction. It smashed against the wall right next to my head, shards scattering across the floor. The room fell silent, all eyes on us. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and rising anger. Then Michael staggered over, wine glass in hand. He sloshed the contents onto my hands and blouse. "Clean yourself up, you're a mess," he slurred, chuckling. Janice joined in the laughter, and a few of the guests murmured uncomfortably, not sure how to react. That was the last straw. I felt something inside me snap, the last thread of tolerance for this life I was living. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my skirt, my voice steady and loud. "Enough," I declared, silencing the room. "I've been to a lawyer, and I'm filing for a divorce." The shock was palpable. Michael and Janice froze, their smiles fading. "Who do you think you are?" Janice hissed, stepping closer. "I am someone who no longer accepts being treated this way," I continued, my voice clear and confident despite the trembling in my knees. "I am protesting the merger agreement. There has been fraud, and I've already sent the documents to the authorities and the court." I could see the fear flicker in Janice's eyes, her tipsy bravado slipping. "You can't do this to us," she stammered. "I also intend to seek financial compensation for all the abuse," I added, not letting her interrupt. I turned, heading upstairs to pack my things. Behind me, I could hear Janice scrambling after me, her tone suddenly changing to one of desperation. "Emma, please, let's talk about this. We can sort something out." I stopped at the top of the stairs, facing her one last time. Pulling out Thomas's business card, I held it out. "You can discuss it with my lawyer. From now on, that's how we communicate." Packing my bag was quick, I didn't have much I wanted to take from that house. With every piece of clothing, every personal item, I felt a bit more free. After what felt like an eternity of legal battles and emotional upheaval, the final court hearing was more than just a procedural event, it was the day I reclaimed my life and my family's business. Standing beside Thomas, my lawyer, I watched with a steely resolve as the judge delivered the verdict that would set everything right. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff," the judge announced, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "It is clear from the evidence presented that the defendant engaged in fraudulent activities to secure control of the business. Therefore, the original merger agreement is hereby nullified, and full ownership rights will revert to the plaintiff and her father." Janice, my former mother-in-law, sat stiffly, her face unreadable. Beside her, Michael looked down, unable to meet my gaze. The court also imposed a hefty fine on Janice and ordered her to pay financial compensation, which conveniently matched the value of her shares in our business. It was more than justice, it was poetic. The business that my father and I had built with love and hard work was ours again, and Janice was out, forced to find employment elsewhere due to the financial ruin that her greed had brought upon her. Back at the store, Dad and I wasted no time in making changes. Replacing the generic fittings with our cozy decor, we brought back the community vibe that had defined our place in the neighborhood. As I reintegrated into the day-to-day operations, I also decided to pick up where I had left off with my education. Going back to college felt right. I knew now more than ever how important knowledge and education were, especially if I wanted to take our business to new heights. Life without Michael was strangely liberating. After the divorce, he had pleaded for forgiveness, hoping to salvage our marriage, but too much had happened, and my decision was firm. One day, a familiar face popped into the shop. The girl I had helped during the rainstorm came in, holding her mother's hand. She ran up to me as soon as she saw me, a bright smile on her face. "Miss Emma," she exclaimed, her voice echoing around the shop. "Hey there." I crouched down to her level. "How are you?" I'm good. Mommy says we can get a big cake from here for my birthday. Absolutely, I laughed, glancing up at her mother, who smiled warmly at me. We'll make sure it's the best cake you've ever had. As they wandered off to pick out some pastries, I straightened up, watching them go. This was why I fought so hard. Not just for me or for my dad, but for these moments of joy and community.